oftentimes what we find is if somebody's paying an encryption, they might double encrypt the system.
Yep.
Or maybe they don't attack you, but now the community knows that you're vulnerable, and other people will focus on attacking you. So ultimately, ransomware has a huge impact to the way your business operates. You don't want to be locked out of your core system.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. With innovations in technologies, we have put software on every device and endpoint too soon, which has increased the attack surface significantly. Unfortunately, this has also been done without truly understanding the ramifications of these advancements. The hackers or state-sponsored agencies are advancing their capabilities with the same speed, if not more, with these developments, and businesses need to keep up with them or their intellectual properties could be at risk. The SMB businesses, in particular, are at a higher risk as they cannot afford to spend millions of dollars on cybersecurity. In today's episode, we have our guest, Bill Palifka, who shares his insights into low-hanging fruits for SMB businesses without breaking their bank. He also shares insights into concepts such as cybersecurity needs for IIOT versus OT devices, awareness of the potential known and unknown access points on the network, and the attack surface for hackers. Finally, he shares his insights into why tracking the end of life of software is crucial for avoiding any attacks and what to do if you get hit by ransomware. Let me introduce Bill to you. An expert in cybersecurity and technology infrastructure, Bill Palifka has consulted with clients ranging from small businesses up to the Fortune 500 level companies and is the CEO and co-founder of Cymonics, a full spectrum cybersecurity consulting firm. Bill has over 15 years of experience in leadership positions spanning product management, product development, and general management roles. He has helped companies successfully manage the relationship between business and technology and builds winning solutions that properly integrate into companies' operations. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Bill, welcome to the show.
Hey Sam, thanks for having me today.
Of course, my pleasure, and I'm super excited to have you because the kind of insight you are going to bring from the cybersecurity world for our SMB manufacturers, it's going to be so much fun. Just to kick things off, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus, Bill?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. This has been a 15-year journey in the technology industry. We're super excited to be helping manufacturers help build out cybersecurity programs. A long time back, I started with application design building. And, over the past 15 years, I've actually had quite of exposure to a lot of different technologies. I've worked with CRM systems, I've worked with ERP systems. I've gotten into, things like communication platforms, any type of application to run your business, really kind of focused on that corp IT world. But, of lately, the truth is in the traffic. So, if you're not getting into networks, you're not getting into cloud security, that's kind of the future and where things are moving to. We're looking at all types of technology and helping businesses kind of secure the foundations of their business.
You are so right. Some people don't really understand the implications of cybersecurity. It's definitely critical. And we have been talking about this for some time now. It can be detrimental to a lot of businesses. So understanding that is definitely going to be helpful. On that note, we have one more standard questions that we ask every single guest that come on the show. And Bill, that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time for manufacturing. If you really look at what's happening with digital transformation, the amount of data that is being collected is just astronomical, and it's really changing a lot of how manufacturing is done today. And so I just think it's such a bright future for manufacturing. I think there are a couple little pitfalls, and security being one of them.
Yes, definitely. I mean, there are plenty of opportunities. Obviously, the protection needs to be there. But overall, you are absolutely right that manufacturing is going through a dramatic shift at this point of time. So let's get into the today's topic, which is going to be really security planning for our SMB manufacturers. So let's say if some of the manufacturers, they have never had any sort of digital systems, and this is the first time they are getting the taste of digital technology, the power, and now they are probably freaking out as well because of all the fears related to cybersecurity. And obviously, they are not going to have millions of dollars like these larger corporations. So let's say if they are trying to exploit the low-hanging fruit in terms of what they can really do to do the bare minimum, just not to miss the bus, at least in the low investment, right? So how can these SMB businesses plan for cybersecurity? What can they do to exploit on those low-hanging fruits?
Yeah, Sam, it's really definitely interesting. When you're a large organization and you have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on this, your strategy is going to be very different, right?
Yeah.
But if you're a small business, everything needs to move the needle, right? And there's a lot of things that a business can do when it comes to cybersecurity that actually can be low cost or even no cost, right? Some of it's just how much are you going to put effort into behind things. And so, we like to bucket things into three areas. And I think some of the challenges for manufacturing are that they have to manage a lot. The attack surface is quite large. It's not just the corp IT systems, but you have IIOT systems. Sometimes in manufacturing, you also have your OT systems. And so each one of those, the tenets of cybersecurity don't really change across those. But, because there's multiple layers, you have to approach this with an open mind. So, but a lot of upfront stuff that we tell organizations to focus on, do you know what you're protecting, right? Can you define what your crown jewels are, right? And that's a question that you have to look internally to, right? Other things that we talk about is what assets does the company have? It's really hard oftentimes if you don't know what you have in your business, from a software, from a hardware standpoint, what are the things on your network that are communicating internally and externally, right?
Okay.
If you don't know what's communicating, right, and you don't know the assets that you have, how are you going to protect those, right? A lot of times also, when you're looking at establishing password hygiene, do you have good practices around there? That's a very low cost area, but has a high win rate, right? Get rid of duplicated passwords, educate the workforce around those things, use multi-factor authentication, right? Use a password manager. If your senior leadership isn't using password managers and MFA, you're probably wrong, right? Because these things raise the cost to adversaries. Also, once you've identified all your assets, have you done a vulnerability scan? Do you know what those systems look like? Have they been patched recently? Are there updates out there? Do you have a good patch management strategy? That patch management strategy can stop 80% of your problems right there. Because if a lot of times with your software vendors or your hardware vendors, the reason they're putting these patches out there is because they know the vulnerability exists, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that patch is to correct that vulnerability. And in essence, that's just like closing the front door on a bad person, right?
Yeah,
Lock
yeah.
the house. I don't think any of us leave our houses open when we go on vacation. Don't leave your windows and doors open to your business, right? That's
Yep.
what patch management does. And then there's some basic layers of defense, choke points, right?
Yep.
That you can establish. If you're creative, there's open source software out there, depending on how you configure this stuff. But that basic build the foundation really can have a big impact.
So let's talk about, some of those assets that you mentioned. And I am kind of, it's very interesting that you have broken down the IIoT and OT separately. That is something I have not heard of before. So maybe you want to touch on what are going to be your IIoT versus the OT assets. But overall, let's say, I don't know if you're going to have any specific story from the SMB manufacturing space. Can you break down what are different assets that you had in that specific story? And that is probably going to paint a lot of colors for our manufacturers so that they can relate with it. Okay, when you talk about assets,
Sure.
what am I looking at?
Yeah. No. So the challenge, Sam, I think is there's a lot of terminology used,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And when you're a manufacturer and you're focused on taking raw materials and creating something, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole practice in itself. So, but with the IoT, right? The big thing to know about IoT is this is really your sensors, those cameras that you're putting on your shop floors, right?
Yeah.
It's the things that are helping aggregate a lot of data that is really helping with that digital transformation that's occurring in manufacturing, right? So we were very quick to go put a lot of things on the internet. And all these things connect to the cloud and they're transmitting data from your internal systems externally, right? And a lot of the time, those things are linking up to applications that are communicating and pushing your data all over the internet, right? And so, those assets, we want to make sure that they're, one, through vendor management, really, that you're using reputable systems, right? Yeah, that you don't have a lot of known vulnerabilities in them, that they have good established practices, and that those applications and tools that you're using have security built into them. And I think, one of the times when we last talked, a couple of our panelists talked about checking your vendors out, right? That can save you a lot of headache down the road, because your supply chain that's helping you build your business, they can be a vulnerability for you, right? So if you're not managing that piece, you could overexpose your business. So that's really on the IoT side, right? When we get to the OT side, this is like kind of the industrial controls of your plant, right? And a lot of that, you're going to have firewalls set up. You really want those OT systems on their own networks, right? And those are going to communicate locally. You don't want people from the outside being able to control those systems, because they can start to affect your quality of what you're building, or even worse, make the machine do something that you don't want it to do that could actually physically hurt a person, right? And so, again, the way we secure these things, they're going to be similar tools, similar practices. The tenets, like I said, of cybersecurity don't change, but how and what it is and what we're doing will vary depending on the area and focus, right?
Yeah. So let's say if I want to identify the assets and I want to identify, okay, which are the assets that might be vulnerable at this point of time for cybersecurity. What am I doing here? Do I have some sort of tool or software that I can run and it can tell me all my assets? It can tell me all my...
Isn't that the $1 million question, right? Like, how do I know? Well, and Sam, oftentimes when we come into a customer and we sit down with people, they don't understand what they have, right? And so there is a self-reporting element, right? A lot of people will manage these things in Excel spreadsheets, but the challenge with that, and that's a great starting point, right? So if you don't have a list, generate a list. You can do that, right? Just pull up an Excel spreadsheet, create an item, document it, get the IP address, get the MAC address, there's basic elements that you can collect and store, right? But the challenge is things are always coming in and out. You have a life cycle to products. You get new laptops. You have a new switch, that you put in somewhere because you reconfigured something around, right? So there are passive and active scanning tools that we use. Oftentimes we can map what's on your networks and we can validate against those lists that are being generated. And oftentimes when we do use tools to do passive and active scanning, we tend to identify a bigger chunk of systems. And like I was starting to say, oftentimes when we're sitting down with senior leaders, they're a little bit surprised when we come back and we say, well, I know you self-reported that you had, 100 laptops, but we found 150, and they're like, really, and so why is that important? Well, making sure that antivirus is on those systems is important, right? Making sure that the operating systems are up to date is important. And so again, everything we start with is know the attack surface, know what you have, know what you're trying to defend.
Okay, very interesting. So I am going to have some follow-up questions there. So number one, let's say if I were not aware of how many devices were there on my network, and my understanding is going to be, let's say if you are looking at the report that you generated, it's going to have some sort of IP addresses, and every device that is actually connecting to your network is going to have some sort of IP addresses. So you can get that list from your network that these are the devices that are being connected. Now, if people are reporting 100 systems, but then you are getting 150 IP. There is somebody that is on the network. It could be, somebody simply brought the phone inside your premises. It could, that's probably not going to be vulnerable, but you still have that in your network, and you need to know that, you have a device that could be.
Well, Sam, this is the new challenge, right? And again, we have a lot more devices than ever before. And you say your phone might not be an attack path. We would tend to argue maybe that's not so true, right?
Right.
And so this is where policies and procedures with your workforce really kind of come into play. Tying this together for a senior leader, it becomes very valuable to help educate your workforce on what is proper behavior, what are good handling practices for your mobile devices. Bring your own device. What can go on networks, what can't go on networks. Oftentimes this is why when we're sitting down with customers, helping them think through these things, we'll walk through and say, do you have all your ports open? What can go on your network? Are you doing application whitelisting? Are you can limit what your workforce brings on your corporate networks. And so we help people think through those things. And again, this is, you want to not limit the business from being able to do what it's doing, but you also don't want to have the business take unnecessary risks, right? You don't want people to just use whatever they want. You want to kind of have able to guide and steer them, and then have approval processes around these things too, to bring things into the company. So we that's a lot of times what cybersecurity experts are working with customers to help them understand.
Right. So this is, let's say, if we talk about the device side and the phones that we have on premise, I think that's easier to track overall. Let's say if I sniff my network, I will know how many IPs are there on the network. But when we look at, let's say, the business software side, because things could be slightly more complicated, and I am actually going to share one story from my experience, and my story is related to more of the legality of the issue and the operational challenges that this company had. But these challenges are going to be equally applicable to the world of cybersecurity as well. So the story is, I was working with a client and they had at least 10 different systems as part of their combined bundle. But for them, just to make it easier, what these vendors did is, they simply said that you have just one system called, we are simply going to name it called Dynamics. Okay, but under Dynamics, you have 10 different add-ons. Those add-ons are actually deployed on multiple different servers. You might have a data warehouse, which is deployed somewhere else. Then you might have an integration tool that is deployed somewhere else. So now, if you ask me as the executive, okay, what kind of software do you have? I'm going to tell you that we have an ERP called Dynamics, or maybe we can call it AX400. I don't know, some name. But you are not going to know how many modules are actually deployed as part of this software. So what is going to be your debugging process? Do you get into the contracts of the software, how these contracts are structured? How are you going to debug this process?
Yeah. So Sam, you're spot on. The configuration of things matter, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what you're bolting on and what you're opening up through APIs matter. And then oftentimes when we're sitting down with folks from different companies, right? Those are the type of questions we ask, right? We want to get the devil is in the detail of some of the stuff, right? And we'll want to understand and help them say, do you really need these applications? Do you really need those bolt-ons? And it's even more. So we do get into the structure of what those applications look like, how they're connecting to the network, where the data is transmitting from and to, right? Those are all areas that we want to help businesses understand, and then put proper security measures around them, put the right controls in place to help manage them. And Sam, this gets even worse, right? In the sense of it's not just, the applications, right? It's your browsers, right?
Yeah.
It's the bolt-ons into your browsers. It's your emails. It's the bolt-on into your email system. There are all these attack pathways inside of a business that just leave you open and vulnerable, right? And so, as cybersecurity experts, we come in, we help organizations think through these processes. We help put controls in place that will help mitigate and de-risk their environments so that they can operate and not have run with overexposure.
Right. So we are going to do some more debugging in the story, okay? In parallel. So let's say if you have the browser and browser has a lot of add-ons, sure, the risk could be that the sniffer that is probably reading all of these apps, they can probably steal my passwords. They can try to log in as me in the application and try to steal my data. Obviously, that is equally important as well. But when it comes to, let's say, the financial data, when I'm talking about the application, right? In this particular case, I can look at my browser. You can probably look at the browser. You can trace, how many add-ons are installed. It's not as difficult. But when you have challenges such as, number one, if you are going to have, for example, financial application, there you have your accounting data, you have financial data, you have your customer data,
Sure.
you have your vendor data. If you are a healthcare organization, you are probably going to have your patient data, which is extremely risky, if you ask anybody, right? Now, the problem here is not really once you understand how many applications you have, then you can probably secure it. The problem is going to be really in the communication. If you are going to ask the team or the executive, even the IT inside this company, they are going to say, you know what, I just have one application. They don't even know how many applications are there. Even if you're going to ask the vendor is going to say, you know what, it's just one application. It's called ERP.
No, and you're right. There's a little bit of teasing out of this, right? And people don't know what they don't know sometimes,
Yeah.
right? And so again, I think this is why oftentimes, when you're talking to folks in cybersecurity, most of them have been around the block for quite a while, right? Experience does play into this a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And being able to see different elements of what others have done in the past, and just kind of having a little more intuition to
Yeah.
knowing there's a little bit more to the story than what's usually being told, right? And so how well can you do the forensics is really kind of a big part of the cybersecurity and how it affects your program that you're putting together. But bottom line, going back, this is why oftentimes, because if you sit there and you try to build a program, you could be just building and building and building and building. And Sam, that is not necessarily the most practical, right? And that's why oftentimes we start with the crown jewels.
Yeah.
Know what you need to protect, know what's most important to the business,
Yeah.
and then build your programs around those elements. And I love entrepreneurs because you can't scare them. They've seen it. They're risk averse people. They run to risk. They have tolerances of risk, right? And that's why a lot of the work we do, is about de-risking as much as we can.
Yeah.
But can you cover for everything? for every single scenario. The adversaries that are trying to hack companies or steal intellectual property or commit espionage or whatever the area is. Oftentimes their tactics are continuously changing, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why also at some point we move from the defensive posture to
Yeah.
a couple other areas, right? We really want to know how you're going to respond, right?
Yeah.
How are you going to control? And this is why things like your data recovery processes are really important, and other elements to cybersecurity. So we don't only focus only on the protect side, we also focus on the response side, right? Because it's not a question of if you're going to be breached. It's more of a question today of when will you be breached, and how are you going to react to it? How quickly are you going to be able to remediate that problem?
Yeah.
And how big of an impact is that going to have to your operations, right? Because if you're not prepared for this stuff, your business could be impacted greatly. But if you've got a plan, you know how to operate against this, you know how to isolate issues like ransomware and what to do and who's responsible, right? At the end of the day, your business can react to this stuff quicker, isolate the problem, and get things back up and running. And like, how quickly are you going to pull your recovery systems back up, right? So
Yeah.
that your business can keep moving even after it's been impacted.
Okay, amazing. So let's talk about the end of life. I think you did mention that during the conversation that end of life, obviously you don't want to have any of the operating systems that are going to be super outdated. They are not going to have the latest patch. Okay, again, I'm actually going back to my business software conversation. Typically business software are going to be the last ones to replace because they have a lot at stake. You can disrupt your business processes because if you change the foundation, the ERP, the financial application, then you are probably going to shake the entire organization. If it is only about, let's say, the updating the laptop and phones, it does not have as much risk. You can still do that, right? So they are typically last ones to get updated. In fact, I'll tell you one more scenario. You have a lot of custom applications, and when you have the custom applications, even if you are hiring very expensive programmers, even if you are hiring very expensive IT people, they are not necessarily expert at cybersecurity. When you are going to utilize a product from outside that has been tested for cybersecurity issues, obviously you are going to be far more protected. For example, let's say if you go for any of the reputable vendor, if they get hacked, obviously it's going to be everywhere in the news that either SAP got hacked or NetSuite got hacked or Acumatica
Sure.
got hacked, right? But
Just
I
look at
mean,
SolarWinds, right?
exactly. So in this particular case, in case of end of life, I know a lot of customers that are still running, let's say, the AS400 system from IBM, or super old mainframe systems, or super old custom application. They have their own branding. Can you believe this? Okay, on the software application. So what are some of the risk factors that you see for these applications?
Yeah, absolutely, Sam. Right. The big risk is when a system's unsupported, right? The community that's trying, the adversary, right?
Yeah.
They know those systems become unsupported, right? And so they just start building all types of methods to breach those systems, right?
Yeah.
And so once they're able to identify that you have that system and they've created a strategy to breach it, right? You, there's no real good solution out there to stop that from occurring, right? And so that's the real challenge with, I think, the end of life products, right? And so the other side of the equation is I think this is why you're seeing a lot of folks move to the cloud. I
Yeah.
also think that's why you're seeing, because naturally there are protective, the cloud has naturally been built with protection and security in mind.
Yeah.
But again, it's a tough thing, right? Because businesses want to try to get as much mileage out as they can. But again, that's why a lot of times when it comes to your bigger applications, there's more of a cost benefit analysis done to understand what the true risks are to the business. But at some point, the risks do outweigh, and it does does dictate a change, right? And so you'll see somebody start to sunset once they've kind of reached that end of life cycle, or have done that analysis, and the risk is either so great that staying on that system is no longer any good, or there's just enough cost savings, believe it or not, by migrating to a new strategy. And so those are internal conversations. They're not easy conversations to have for businesses, usually, because again, usually with those type of conversations, the dollars associated to change are real, they're significant, and that has to have a deeper discussion usually at the end of it. But a lot of times that's also why, as cybersecurity experts, we'll touch on technical debt. We'll help people understand what that life cycle looks like. What is acceptable risk? How do you work through understanding what acceptable risk looks like, especially for those bigger applications?
Yeah, so interesting commentary there. And I am going to have one more comment related to unsupported applications. And it blows my mind, to be honest. Okay, when I talk to these customers, and I'll give you one more story related to some of the comparisons that we do. And this is going to be the cost versus benefit of on-prem versus cloud. And people are often debating if it makes sense to pay for the annual subscription fee. When I have bought my software, I kind of own it, and nobody really touches. And when we are doing these calculations, and I'm like, okay, let's put all the numbers down and let's try to evaluate. So in our world, and obviously, as you know, Bill, we do a lot of ERP work, right? So in our world, we always like to think that ERP is going to have same life cycle as you are replacing your car, right? It's probably going to be your 5, 7, 10 years, not more than that. If you're using something 20 years old, then nobody can really support that. The technology is really old. It has become more expensive to support it. And that's why vendors are really calling off to help you, to protect you. But these businesses, sometimes, they don't want to listen. And one of the questions that we always get is, what, if you are doing on-prem, you have paid, let's say, 2.5 times of the license fee, whatever you paid in the beginning, and then on an ongoing basis, you are probably going to pay 20 to 25%, along with paying for your server, hardware, the patching, the people, all of that you need. And then the next question is going to be, or the next comment there is going to be, hey, we don't pay 20%. And I'm like, okay, you don't pay 20%? How is that possible? Okay, because none of the vendors that are going to have a supported application, they are going to charge that 20%. So now the next question I'm going to ask is, okay, who's supporting your application? So sometimes what they have done is, just to save the money, they have created these arrangements, and these third-party vendors, who might not have the cybersecurity exposure or the understanding or the appreciation of why these things matter, they are going to be supporting these applications for, let's say, 50% of the cost.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Sam, I think there, again, going to that risk calculation, right? Businesses are constantly trying to balance the cash flow, right? And their capital expenditures, right? And so, oftentimes, if this is why cybersecurity also is a little bit of a cultural change, right? And if you're not addressing the cultural side of how your business is running, and educating the employees, you'll run and change. So oftentimes, we do want to address the culture, right? And so it's a tough game to try to help people understand what are the full benefits of switching out an ERP system and taking it from on-prem to the cloud. There's a lot of moving pieces to that discussion that has to occur. But when you put them side by side, a lot of the time, you can start to see the differences. And oftentimes there are clear winners to the strategy of helping a company move through that, right? And it's not always just move it to the cloud, right? Sometimes it's a hybrid solution, right? And that's why I also, oftentimes when I look at this stuff, this is where the interesting side of, it's not just the IT side, it's really a holistic of the whole environment, and that's why how data moves through, that's why we like to start with, what data, what's being used, how is it moving through your organization, and identify those things, because that will also start to help us shape what is important, how do you start to mitigate that, how do you start to drive down the cost to managing those elements, because if you're not getting into the cost side, there's money that is being spent. Businesses need to understand what that looks like. They need to be able to budget and plan and forecast, and you got to get down into the truth of it all. And so having experts that can understand those moving pieces like yourself, this is why people come back to us, right?
Yeah, exactly. But the point I was trying to make is, you know what? Just know where you are. You cannot treat your IT systems and the business systems as the black box that, you know what? I have my vendor, they'll figure it out.
Well, that's why we go back to asset. What does the attack surface look like, right? That is like the number one thing we talk about, right? That is going to be the thing that sets a lot of what your strategy is going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about ransomware. I think that we had on our agenda as well. So let's say, if somebody does not know what a ransomware really is, how do they work? If somebody is going to be attacked, what are some of the common entry points for ransomware? Let's say if I have never seen a ransomware in my life, what am I going to experience when I get one? If I get one, what are the steps that I am going to take to get my operations back, I guess?
Yeah. Well, first off, we hope you never get ransomware, right? Yeah. Because what's happening if you're not familiar with ransomware is that you're being locked out of your core systems, right?
Yeah.
Somebody has clicked on something that they shouldn't have. They shared something and somebody shared something back. Something triggered an injection that allowed a hacker to take over that system, encrypt it, and basically lock you out of it. And then at that point, usually the attacker will come back and ask for a ransom. And they'll say, hey, listen, I know this system is really important to you. If you just pay me X, we'll give you an encryption key and we'll unlock your system. Well, Sam, the challenge with all this is the person that's willing to do that has malicious intent. They're doing it for financial gain. Yeah. Oftentimes what we find is if somebody's paying an encryption, they might double encrypt the system. Or maybe they don't attack you, but now the community knows that you're vulnerable, and other people will focus on attacking you. So ultimately, ransomware has a huge impact to the way your business operates. You don't want to be locked out of your core systems. But what happens if you do, right? The first thing to do is, before you ever get ransomware, if you have a plan, right? Know how you're going to react, educate your workforce about ransomware, teach them a little bit about how ransomware occurs and, social phishing campaigns and, social engineered campaigns that are targeting your workforce. That stuff is real. That's a lot of times how this stuff happens. There are other things that hackers do as well too. But that's a big majority of it. But also, the first step, if you do get ransomware, stop, lock down your systems, isolate that system. Don't let it spread, right? And a lot of the times that could be like, are you blocking using your firewall? Or do you just disconnect completely from the network, right? Unplug it. Often you'll want to have a restore process. If you don't have a restore process, this is where things can go very badly because this will impact a lot of the time your recovery cycle. But if you do have a restore, get your restore process. Also, there's a process of checking, are there decryption methods already to that ransomware out there? If it is, that's great. That means the impact of the ransomware is going to be less, right? But oftentimes that's not the case, so because there are people in our community that are constantly focused on ransomware. They are working on these decryptions. Sometimes they do decrypt these things before they could cause a lot of challenge, but oftentimes there is no decryption. So what happens if there's no decryption, right? You really got to start the restore process. And, oftentimes this is where people start to weigh, do I pay the ransom? Do I not? Right? Because the longer it goes and the more disruptive it is, the higher the urge is to pay it. But, at the end, we highly recommend reaching out to experts that deal with ransomware. They have systems, tools, and processes. Also, they can help you with the restore processes. And hopefully your company has done a little bit of the pre-work to make this less painful. But if not, it could be a long haul for a business to restore. There are organizations out there that have gotten ransomware where they've been impacted 6-9 months, right? And the restore process and getting up and running and recovery is very, very painful. Other times, if you're well prepared, you got a plan, you know how to isolate, you know how to check. Maybe you're only affected a week or two, right? Maybe you're only affected a day, that pre-planning can save you a lot of headache.
Awesome. So that's it for today. Bill, do you have any last minute closing thoughts or advice for our listeners?
Yeah. I think a lot of this sounds scary. I think a lot of people think, oh my God, it's too much to tackle.
Yeah.
Right. The big thing is to break this down, and I think a lot of times what we say, every task when you first look at it looks monumental. But when you know how to break it down into foundational and you have a strategy for rolling out, and improving on that foundation and then ultimately optimizing that foundation, this is where you can win. And cybersecurity you're not going to boil the ocean all in one day, right? It's a journey. You're looking at affecting the culture of your company, the way it operates, right? And when you're working with good people to help you think through these things become a whole lot easier. I leave you with those thoughts.
Yeah, and my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be, if you actually go 100 years back, probably we did not have the locks in our homes just because the world was really good. There weren't many people who were stealing or breaking into houses. But things changed and we all needed physical security. We have come a long way, and we are in the same phase with respect to cybersecurity and the OT security right now. If you don't have any sort of cybersecurity measures, then you are not really protected. And now the number of hackers that we have in the community are increasing on a daily basis. They are becoming sharper because of the advancement in the technology, because of machine learning, because of AI. So things are only going to increase. So one of these days, you are going to figure out that you definitely need a lock to your systems, to your process, to your business. Everybody needs a lock. On that note, I really want to thank you for your time, Bill.
Sam, thank you very much for having me today. Really enjoyed our conversation.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Bill, head over to cymonix.com. It's cymonix.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Denrich Sanenda, who discusses how operational security is vital to ensure that your plant is always available and operational without any danger to the lives inside the plant. Also, the interview with Michael Swagenhofer, who discusses how insurance companies evaluate manufacturers' risk profiles. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.